The National Guard had been deployed in some areas to come out and try to get the kids away from the schools. So I've told stories about some of the fastest driving days I've ever had, some of the best driving, most enjoyable driving days, and even some of the ones that had the worst outcomes. But the craziest day of driving that I've ever experienced, and one that I honestly can't imagine will ever be topped, was on January 28th, 2014, which is a day that's come to be known as the Icepocalypse here in Atlanta, also called Snowmageddon. And it's been farcically depicted on Saturday Night Live with Buford Calloway, ridiculously named, in fact, after the city that I grew up in, about 45 minutes northeast of Atlanta, about how crazy it was to be here driving in a car that day. And it's worth noting that whereas in most of the world, some weather will limit when you can use a cool car, in Atlanta, we don't really have that as a problem. I mean, you can pretty much drive whatever you've got year round. And I tend to do that myself. In fact, whenever there's a forecast for bad weather, most people honestly just ignore it and go about their days, because a bad snow day here in Atlanta is a couple of inches, and most days, even in the deepest of winter, it'll still get over 40 or even 50 degrees during most of the, warmest parts of the day. So whatever is there is just going to melt the next day. Now, if there is snow on the ground, the city goes crazy. It is utter pandemonium. All schools will be closed for days on end, and we just have no preparation. There's no salt trucks or snow scrapers or anything like that. And beyond that, nobody has winter tires. Nobody knows how to drive if their car starts to slide. So it is just a dumpster fire of a driving experience if that ever happens. But fortunately, it really doesn't. I mean, I'd say I only remember maybe 10 to 15 days my entire life where the roads were really impassable in Atlanta. But one of those was this day, and it kind of started out like any other possible snow day. In fact, at that time, I was working at Lamborghini Atlanta. We saw the forecast was supposed to get bad, but what ended up happening was kind of a unique circumstance where we had some freezing rain that then thawed, but then very quickly the temperature dropped. And this was kind of just after noon. So the snow really started to come down. And at the time, my wife was teaching elementary school literally just across the street from the dealership. Of course, her schedule was very different, so we rarely commuted together, but she was there and they were talking about how they were going to start getting people out and shutting down the schools as early as they could that day. Because despite the warnings of snow, where in many cases they would have just canceled school preemptively, they had all the kids come in. And so now they were kind of faced with, are we going to be able to get them home in the normal way? And with bus schedules and everything, it was getting kind of complicated. And so we at the dealership kind of made the decision after nothing was really happening that we were going to close down and that people could start going home whenever they wanted to. And I must have had the Mercedes CL55 there, which was certainly on summer high performance tires, not the thing you'd want to drive in inclement weather with. And Nick of Motorcycle Crashed into Panamera, Ant Crawling Out of His Face fame was there as well with his Corvette, so he was in no shape to drive it home, and he was only a little bit further along the same route from me. So I said, all right, well, you come with me, we'll go across the street, get Megan's Range Rover, we'll all make it home. And so he and I went over there and so kind of waited about an hour for them to get the kids all situated to wherever central area, and then they released as many of the teachers to go on home as they could. And so at that point we set out, and this must have been probably about 2 p.m. when we left Sandy Springs. And my normal route home would just be to go up 400 and then across. It'd be about 12 miles to get to my house, and it would normally take, 25, 30 minutes, maybe 45 in really bad Atlanta traffic, which is certainly a risk. But as soon as we pulled out of the parking lot, it's utter gridlock. And that's because a little ways down the road, there's a strong uphill. And at every uphill, as the roads had started to freeze, there were literally just pileups of cars that had attempted to go up, totally lost it, and come back down. And this is what we were hearing on the radio was happening everywhere. Cars were running out of gas, cars were crashing, cars were sliding any which way, and it was all just a total mess. And it literally, I think, took us an hour and a half to go the 1 mile to get to Georgia 400, which again involved a couple more uphill stretches, which the Land Rover didn't have any trouble with, but every other car was just really, really struggling. And so we got onto the highway, and it was just a total mess. Everybody's crashed on the side, run out of gas, spinning, tractor trailers laying on their sides. It was literally an apocalyptic situation. So very aptly named this Icepocalypse Day. And so we just kind of continue along. There is general movement, but you're having to weave in and out as people can get around, and then everybody's kind of staging as the next person tries to go up whatever the next hill is. And unfortunately, because of the way that highway is set up, there's not much of like a real shoulder that would be like unpaved, because that would have been perfect for us, because we could have kind of gone off on the shoulder, driven in the snowy grass, which the car would not have struggled with at all. But we're just continuing along, and we had actually brought with us another one of my wife's coworkers, also a teacher, that was going just a little bit further than Nick. So all four of us were in the car, just kind of making the best of it, hearing all the news reports of the crazy crashes and fires and everything else, and literally watching people in work clothes with no coats walking along the side of the highway. And we picked up a couple of them on our way up to the exit where we would get off of 400 to get them further along the way as they were going to get gas cans or whatever else. And we were hearing on the news like people who had been on the road at that point for 6, 7, 8 hours. And it probably took us 5 hours, I would guess, to get up Georgia 400. Amazingly, my wife's car had enough gas in it to make it, which is a very, very infrequent occurrence whenever I get into it now. But regardless, we were able to do that. And so we got up to the exit, and there was a Waffle House a little ways just off the exit to the right. Now, we were in gridlock traffic up this hill. I said, you guys just walk up to the Waffle House, get some dinner, get me something to go. By the time I get up there, you'll have already eaten, hop back in the car, you'll be warm, we'll be good to go. Now, it's worth saying, this was at a very, very crazy time in my life. So January of 2014, this was just a few months after the New York to LA record. I was still kind of in the media whirlwind of interviews and things like that, just having a whole lot of fun with that. It was also maybe a month after I had been in the Aventador crash while working at Lamborghini Atlanta. And so that was all just a little bit too fresh. And in fact, so we had just found out that we were pregnant with our first child on New Year's Day of 2014. So my wife is 7, 8 weeks pregnant at this point. We had just found out. And so the prospect of being stuck in a frozen car was perhaps a little higher stakes than usual. But they did that. They got us some food and came back to the car, and we're just kind of crawling along. And there's a big hill right off of our exit, and it was just littered with cars all over the place. And literally it was impassable, not because we couldn't get through it, but just because the whole road was blocked with crashed cars and, you know, people walking every which way. And so we ended up going down another road and through a big church parking lot that had some gates open. I had heard that they had to build a bridge to a different exit, and I thought we might be able to make it. So we went through there. So we slid around a little bit. We ended up making it into and then through this parking lot. But of course, the exit had some arms blocking it. And so we ended up dropping the suspension on the Range Rover down, and Nick got out to hold them both up so that I could drive under it. And we made it. We got back on the same road, and we were moving along. And then somehow they had found some snowplow thing, and they were running it along the road that I needed to pass. And so the road that we needed to go, the only way to get home was closed. But this must have been 10:30, 11 o'clock, and we actually came across this woman and this daughter that were in workout clothes that had decided that since it was going to be a snow day, they were just going to go to the gym. And so they hopped in. So I think we had 6, 7 people in the car at this point, and we're just trying to get back to our house so I could drop my wife, and then I was going to take Nick home and the other girl from her school and these girls that just needed to get a little ways back. But they never got done scraping this road, so we ended up going around where they had kind of put up some barrels to block it and drove through the median, because the road at that point was really, really icy. And we got up a couple hills and made it around through some crazy intersections. Obviously, all the traffic lights are out. And at this point, there were very few people still driving on the roads, but it was still very hard to get around because there were literally crashed cars everywhere. And we're still hearing of people being stuck on literally every highway. If you looked at a traffic map of Atlanta, every single road was red. It was as though, just based on when people were at work and the fact that they had totally ignored all the warning signs, literally we were all on the highway. Fortunately, up towards the suburbs, it wasn't that big of a deal in terms of getting to where we needed to go. It's just steep inclines that nobody else had really tried to do. So the car made it great. Again, the Land Rover proving itself to be the best 4x4 by far. I got the other girl home. I took Nick home. We ended up going to the Waffle House because it was the only thing open to eat again. At this point, it was probably 1, 2 in the morning. And I made it home literally just about 12 hours after I had left Lamborghini Atlanta. And that was actually a short commute that day. You heard of people being stuck in their cars for 15, 18, 24 hours before they were able to get help. The National Guard had been deployed in some areas to come out and try to get the kids away from the schools because the school buses couldn't make it. And in fact, there were at least 20 or so kids that had to spend the night at my wife's elementary school. So the next day we went out and we took some water and some food to people as we saw them still parked on the side of the road. We filled up some gas cans and found some other friends that were still stuck in their cars and got them to their homes. And we went on to her school, and there were still about a dozen kids there after everything they'd been able to try to do. And so I took that last dozen or so home in several trips, got them back to their houses or apartments or whatever, and where their families were obviously freaking out, but everybody had kind of been, I guess, banding together to make the best of 2 inches of snow that had fallen on the roads. And we were the laughing stock of pretty much the entire world that next week because of just what insanity had happened. I ended up going back to the dealership and forwarding all the calls to my cell phones because I was the one that could get in there. And so we just worked from home the next couple of days, sold a few cars, and ended up, just coming away with the stories to tell about it. For the next must have been 2 years. If you looked at anything that was cheap on Craigslist Atlanta, it was some car that had a salvage title because all sides of it were lightly damaged in a low-speed sliding collision. I found an S63 that I almost bought that literally it was an all-over repaint because of Icepocalypse. That's what he said. He's like, yeah, that's what happened. So it had a branded title, but it was really cheap. And I didn't end up buying it, but it was probably a good deal. I mean, you saw all these crazy cars. I mean, brand new Audis and AMG cars and BMW M cars just parked on the side of the road, and people had just walked home. Some people walked 10, 15, 20 miles to get back to their houses, literally probably in whatever shoes and clothes they wore to work, because again, nobody prepares for this stuff. But of course, this was again just proof of Doug Tabbitt's thesis that the way you have a good car story is you just say yes and go try something crazy. And so it was fortunately not a scary thing for us because we knew we had enough gas and the car was going to work and we were going to get through whatever we had to, but it could have gone a whole lot worse, but it was a whole lot of fun the next day to play Superman and just go rescue as many as we could.